Okay, so our first speaker is going to be Professor George Hirsch from University of California, San Diego. And his title of his talk is, Should the American Physical Society be more or less welcoming to the analysis of underlying data? We are all scientists, and I think we all understand the importance of data in making our hypotheses and coming to conclusions. So go ahead, George.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. And so let me get started. Hopefully this works. Yes. All right. So there has been recently controversy on whether a reported finding of room temperature superconductivity involves data fabrication, alteration, and or manipulation. And I describe what I will say in my abstract. Let me just write here the closing sentence that I will argue that APS should be more actively involved in issues concerning scientific integrity. So I gave a longer talk on the same topic a year ago, which you can find on YouTube. So the paper in question is about room temperature superconductivity, published in 2020. The material is called CSH, and the senior authors are Salamat and Diaz. And they showed magnetic susceptibility data for 5 different pressures. The data are raw data minus a background signal, and the raw data were shown for only one pressure, and the data for the others. So at the time I noticed, and the background signal, they said, was determined from a non-superconducting sample at 108 GPa. I noticed at the time that the raw data that they had shown were very similar to raw data that were published 12 years ago or so for another material at much lower temperatures, europium. And so I found that strange. The authors of the europium paper are given below, and it turns out that one of the authors was in common to both papers. So I requested the raw data for both papers in November 2020. I received the raw data for europium in 2021. I noticed very quickly that the raw data gave rise to data that were very different from what was published. So the left side is what the measurements indicated, and what was published was very different. So that indicated to me that europium, the signals did not indicate superconductivity. At the same time, James Hamlin, one of the co-authors, also investigated the raw data, and as far as I understand, came to the same conclusion. Still, it took several more months until in December 2021, the paper was retracted from Physical Review Letters. And I was really interested in the CSH paper, and I was trying to get the raw data for many months until asking the authors, the journal, the National Science Foundation, the funding agencies, and everybody told me a variety of reasons for why I couldn't get those data. So I decided to write a paper, and I wrote the paper that I submitted to Physica C, and they posted online in September 2021, where I suggested that there could be scientific fraud involved. The reason being, I explained in the paper, the reason mainly that the raw data were not being released, and they was saying that there were patent reasons when these data, these measurements are unrelated to any patents. So, and that I pointed out that the behavior is highly unusual because the susceptibility is not supposed to go up rapidly as these raw data were showing, and that they were similar to the paper on europium for a very different temperature range. So, and I also pointed out the broader impacts of not knowing whether these data were real or not. I also tried to post this paper in arXiv, but arXiv, when I submitted it in August, put it on hold. They considered for 2 months, then they posted it so everybody could read it in October. They had it posted for 44 days, then they removed it, and because they decided violated professional communication standards, that was after having decided in October that it didn't. And since then, they blocked me from posting papers in arXiv. I have in my webpage, I have a document where I discuss why I think this is happening, which I'm not happy about. The raw data for CSH were released, perhaps because the European paper was released in December. The raw data were then released. And when I looked at the raw data, very quickly I realized there is a disconnect between the raw data and the published data, and in fact an incompatibility between them. And so I wrote several preprints on that, which I couldn't post on arXiv because, as I say, they were blocked. And for example, what I showed in these preprints is that the data, which are the green, which are the difference between raw data and background, the background has the same noise as the raw data, which doesn't make any sense since it's supposed to be an independent measurement, and also the noise is much larger than in the data. It's supposed to be obtained by a subtraction of two noisy functions. Anyway, so this was not widely publicized because it was not on arXiv. Then Dirk van der Marel and I started working together, and Dirk submitted a paper with me that arXiv did post because they only blocked submissions by myself. And so in this paper, we pointed out because of further analysis that Dirk and I did, that the published data had been manipulated. And we wrote a much more extended analysis, which we posted in August, and we published in 2 journals, which references are given here. So the issue is that the raw data are supposed to be raw data minus background signal, and in fact, we found that in fact, the raw data were obtained by taking data and adding a background signal. So that in fact we were wrong when we said the data had been manipulated, the data had been fabricated. So let me show you, for example, what we mean. If we look at the tail of this curve of this AC susceptibility, the data are in red. They look very strange, very structured. And we found that they can be expressed as a sum of a function q of t, which is a quantized component of the form a number by times an integer, and a polynomial that has an analytic formula. Instead, the authors say that the same data can be written as the difference between raw data, the black curve here, and the background, the green curve on the right. So the left side data were calculated in a computer using those analytic formula. The right data were allegedly measured in a laboratory. And that's not just for the tail, for the entire curve and also for other curves, but let's just focus on this curve, these 2 red curves, as I say, and in particular the drop, which signals what's supposed to be a superconducting transition, was calculated in our case in the computer by using numbers that we computed, like 3rd-order polynomials, to compute this function. And if you go to my webpage, you can actually go through a calculation yourself and check that what we are saying is actually facts. So we have 2 alternative conflicting versions of reality, and they cannot both be true. How is this resolved? Well, we asked the authors to provide an explanation. They didn't respond. We asked the University of Rochester to investigate, and they said that they did an inquiry by people we don't know, and they found no misconduct or fraud. But the report is confidential, and so they couldn't tell us anything about it. We asked the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where Ashkan Salamat is a professor, and they told us that they received our allegation and they adjudicated it, but they couldn't tell us anything about it. We asked Nature to investigate. Nature retracted the paper, but they say it's beyond their remit to investigate the matters pertaining to the veracity of the data. We asked the APS to adjudicate. They said we don't have the resources. We asked the National Academy of Sciences to adjudicate, and they said, again, they don't have the resources. We asked the funding agencies, and basically DOE didn't respond. NSF said on September 30, that was after the paper had been retracted by the journal, that they will take no action. Why isn't anybody doing anything? I think it has something to do perhaps with these cease and desist letters that have been floating around. Particular chair of my department got one about our work. And so I think it is maybe because everybody's afraid of having to pay lawyers to defend against frivolous lawsuits. How were such things resolved in the past? In the Schoen scandal, as far as I know, it was in April 2002 that anomalies in the data were discovered. In May, a month later, Bell Labs, the institution, set up a committee to investigate. In September, the committee issued a public executive summary where the authors were also public, and this was all exposed. There were no secrets, and the matter was dealt with in a proper way. What are the consequences of inaction? Well, we are in March 2023, and these same authors have now announced that they discovered a new superconducting material, and it's all over the news, and the general public thinks that there is a new room temperature superconductor. And well, given the previous information that I said, I really don't, I think this is extremely questionable, and this shouldn't be published as is. So agencies are still supporting this work, and the public is being told that the superconducting consumer electronics is around the corner, and that we'll have superconducting components in the next 5 years. So the APS, as I said, so at the time the president of the APS commented on this article that appeared in Science on this controversy, saying that it may stem in part from the ethos of physics, which encourages combativeness. It's very aggressive, not very welcoming. Well, I would like to acknowledge the APS for allowing me, giving me the opportunity to publicly, respectfully, categorically disagree with that statement, and again repeat that I think it would be very helpful if APS would be more actively involved in issues concerning scientific integrity for the benefit of the worldwide physics community and the public. Thank you. I would like say some more things, but I'll answer questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. That was an interesting talk. So far, there are no questions appearing in that Q&A window. So you have another 2 minutes to make more comments.
Yeah,
I think that's very important work. Science by itself itself means that it's validated. If no one else can duplicate the results, and of what value?
Well, you can calculate from these data, as you see in my website, that when the numbers we calculate agree with the numbers they say they measure to 8 decimal places. So that's a fact, and that can, I don't think it's argued or it's a matter of opinion. You cannot get that unless this is true. I don't know if people are curious about the paper on Physica C. Was withdrawn temporarily, and then it was posted again 2 years later. So Physica C, I think, only asked that I remove some analysis of raw data for which I didn't have explicit permission to publish. And the other thing I just wanted to share is journals in general. Some journals did publish our work, but others were very, very concerned about court orders and legal implications. These journals, Europhysics Letters, Modern Radiation Extremes, and International Journal of Modern Physics and Physica C did really very, very well in allowing us to make these results public. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to